Okay. Okay, thank you so much for coming here. Diego Xue, you're the CEO of PanguVR, right? So tell me a bit about your background. You told me before coming on the podcast that you were raised in the US.
Right. Yeah, correct. So I was born in Beijing, China, and my dad and my parents took me to University of Wisconsin. Actually, my dad at that time was working for University of Wisconsin after transferring from UC Berkeley. And he was actually a neuroscientist doing very cell studies based on vision. So after going through elementary school, middle school, and high school, my dad really recommended me to go into computer science because even in his very biological focused studies, they use computers systems a lot, and he thinks that's the way of the future. So he thought, oh, go for it, son, study computer science. And being a good son, of course, I thought, okay, I should listen to my dad. He knows what he's talking about. So then I studied at University of Wisconsin at Madison, which is one of the top computer science universities in the U.S., especially in database systems and artificial intelligence. And that's what I focused on, obtaining my bachelor's degrees and master's, and later working in Silicon Valley at IBM, then at IBM Research. Yeah.
Great. And so what brought you then toward this project, PanguVR? Like, what are the things you're trying to accomplish with this company then, with virtual reality and based on your background?
Yeah, I think I showed a little bit of our demo video to you before. Basically, what we do, the core engine is called Penguin engine. It can transform 3D scenes automatically to a immersive and interactive VR space, a VR experience for the user. So thinking about before when people build 3D objects, let's say in interior design of a home, after building the 3D objects and designs, they would render into, for example, an image for the customers to see. But now through our engine, we can quickly, within just an hour, render an entire 300 square meter house into a fully interactive VR scene where people can actually walk through the space and view it from any angle and, for example, change things they don't like and make sure it's the house they want to have for the future. So that's what our engine does now.
So let me get this straight. So you have some kind of engine that images like a model, like a 3D model, and then finds a way to create it into virtual reality simulation immediately, almost.
Yeah, it's almost immediate. It's a foolproof. It's just like clicking with a click of a button because it's a SaaS-based service. So the customer just upload their entire 3D design into our SaaS service, and through our engine, what comes out is actually a link where they can download the VR executable to run on their local machines. And in the past year, we have rendered over 1 million homes. And through this process, we have done lots of improvements and machine learning to better our algorithms.
But why do you focus on this technology on interior designing or architecture, this kind of area? Why specifically this field?
Okay, that's a very good question. If you think about this, where are we right now? Right, we're inside the studio, and actually, I think more than 70% of the time we're inside a physical location, right? And so we started by rendering objects inside, for example, your home or office, because that's where we see 70% or more of the objects of our eyes sees every day. So that means there are more objects than than any other place, and plus there's more variety of objects. So by actually having the ability to make these rendered perfectly and at a fast pace, we're actually really building the foundation to in the future elaborate that and expand into the entire inside and outside space of the world. Yeah.
But you mentioned that this model is depending on, so you're going to send a link of what you've rendered to potential clients. But so far the market isn't ready for this kind of product service, right? Most people don't have the hardware, the equipment, the virtual reality sets to be able to utilize what you're offering them. So how do you see this currently, this market evolving?
Actually, you're correct because there was the VR just going back in history a little bit. The VR boom started in 2014, 2015, through 2016, and because the acquirement of Oculus by Facebook, right, and that started the whole VR boom. But quickly, people realized the VR headset, for one, is expensive, and second, the hardware capability is not what people envisioned, right? It's corded, it's a little bit heavy. The resolution, even the content is not up to par with what people expect. So actually, the boom kind of died down after 2016. So that's where we started. PanguVR actually started in March 31st of 2016. But our focus actually is going to cater to the enterprise need. Because like you said, with the device not prevalent in every household, it's more up to the enterprise to have a better utilization of it. For example, a research by Greenlight Research said by 2021, actually, majority of the use, I think 37% of the market, I think around 37 billion, it's going to be based on enterprise usage of the headsets.
Interesting. So right now, your current market demographic is focused on like real estate agencies, that kind of customer. What other companies are interested in your products at the moment?
Yeah, so back to the real need, right? So I mentioned before, so interior design, for example, real estate developers, design houses, and furniture makers, they all want to use this to help their customer envision where they're going to see once they have their home built. So this is one aspect. But this is much more because based on this, after we have the ability to render household items, that means we can expand into other items because the technology is the same, right? Going from, for example, a desk or a sofa into, for example, a dress. And that's hundreds of billions of dollars of e-commerce market, for example. So I think our next vision is to go into industries doing what we do best to render from 3D to VR, for example, auto industry, e-commerce, fashion, retail industry, education space, etc. Yeah.
So you're kind of laying the foundations for a market that hasn't matured yet. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So it's all technology based, right? You know, having the ability, for example, by processing tons of data, we can not go into too much detail into the algorithms, but for example, auto materials mapping, 3D optimization, all these are techniques that's developed and perfected by us over the past 2 years. So all these, when you look at 3D objects, they're more or less similar to each other, and it would just be being able to focus on another industry. Of course, there's caveats with each industry and the items or the 3D objects they propose, but on the core, they're more or less the same. Yeah.
So you're using a specialized VR to kind of be able to recognize all sorts of objects, and not just furniture, but moving forward to cars, clothing, this kind of stuff. Is that your AI background going into the business?
Yeah. So, just to give you example, so I think the most valuable part, you know, everybody's talking about AI. I think you probably done talks on AI, but the key to AI is the frameworks are all there. For example, MXNet, TensorFlow, all these, you know, done by, for example, Berkeley, Google. The frameworks are there. I mean, the algorithms are there for the use, but the biggest challenge is to have the right data to learn from, right? And lucky us, we actually had over 100 TBs of 3D models, real life 3D models supplied to us by our partners over the past years. So we're able to be lucky enough to have real data to train our algorithms on. So with this, actually, what's coming next is to dive into other industries, to have data feeds and to expand our algorithm into other industries. Yeah. So, but the good part is a lot of these can be reused. So, which means we can study and compensate and be compatible with other industries really fast. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So why did you choose to set up this business in China, in Beijing or Silicon Valley, right? Because PanguVR is based in Beijing, right? Considering your background, well, you were raised in the U.S. and everything, why did you choose Beijing as opposed to, let's say, somewhere in San Francisco?
Yeah, this is a hard question. Actually, I've been thinking about it. When I was little, in even U.S., I used to watch this movie. It's called Beijing, and I think a lot of people know about it. It's basically there's a famous quote in there. It says people inside the wall wants to come out, and people outside the wall wants to break in. Yeah, so you know, to summarize my kind of personal character, I want to experience new things, and I've studied and worked in the U.S. right for 20 years, and I think I've seen and have done it all. So I wanted to try something different. So even when I was at IBM Silicon Valley, I have this yearning to go back to China to work. So that's why after MBA at Northwestern University, Kellogg, I actually did not interview for any company in the U.S. and only interviewed a couple in China, and finally picked Microsoft as my segue into China. So yeah, one thing is my character, and second, I think, is my love for Chinese culture. For example, China, everybody knows, is one of the four civilizations that has over 4,000 years of culture, and to me, this is very, very interesting. Even back in University of Wisconsin, I studied 4 semesters of classical Chinese. Many people are shocked when they heard I did that, but actually that's what I did with a Taiwan professor. So I really made an effort over the years to keep up my Chinese and my knowledge of Chinese culture. So that's why a culture is a second thing. And because I'm born in Beijing, most people born in Beijing has a very tight affinity to the Chinese culture because of Hutong culture, and that's actually where I live now. Yeah. And the third, I think the third reason is looking at the economy realistically. I think in the past several years, China, even though it's slowing down, the GDP has grown at 7% year over year, and versus almost 3 times the U.S. economy, which is at, I think, 2.5%. So that's that's really, all these added together. Really, I was able to convince myself that I should go back.
Okay. Well, what are the differences? How you compare your experience in Silicon Valley to the Chinese Silicon Valley, if you will, here in Beijing? Because Beijing is considered to be growing in terms of tech industry, and it's becoming a growing behemoth, right? Here in Beijing, we have Zhongwansen is the main tech center, right? So how do you see the experience and difference in mentalities and motivations between the two places?
So I worked in Silicon Valley for almost 5 years. So I've seen a lot that's going on in the Silicon Valley, and my internship during my MBA, actually I worked for Facebook. At that time, Facebook only had about 600 million users. Yeah, and I've seen like how technology companies work, and I really, actually thinking about it, I really took a gamble because I never worked at a startup in China. I never worked in China, period. So that was a gamble. So I wasn't sure, but I have heard in the Silicon Valley, because even that time back in 2008 through 2010, there was a lot of Chinese government or government-led companies that came to Silicon Valley to encourage people to go back. And you probably know Chongguancun actually was one of them. They actually have a center in Silicon Valley to persuade people to go back. Yeah. And they will support you, for example, with funding, with office space, with housing, etc. Yeah. So hearing that over and over, I really thought, China really is valuing technology, is valuing the growth of internet, is valuing the value of returnees to Beijing or Shanghai, Shenzhen, what have you. And that really gave me the kind of a planted seed. So my idea was to, okay, I'll try it out with an international company that I'm familiar of, Microsoft, trying to find my way in China. And then possibly, if I'm ready, I could start a company. So that's kind of how my thought process have been, and really coming out of Microsoft at end of 2014, I haven't done 2 startups. This is my second one. I kind of can attest to the fast pace and the growth of internet space in China. Yeah.
What was your first startup?
My first startup, you probably have, it's an online to offline business. I think 2014, 15, that's the big hype of online, everything became online, offline. But the basic concept was you can order something on an app and then you can receive the service offline, right? DD Taxi is a perfect example. So, yeah.
Well, considering that experience and all things considered, what are some of the challenges then? Because I know the Chinese government, like you said, they're trying to encourage people to come to China, not just Chinese nationals, but other tech entrepreneurs to start up in China, to make use of the space to make available, right? And they also provide subsidies in that sense. But what are some of the challenges you experienced setting up maybe the first business, and what would you experience in the second business as well?
Okay. I think there's always difficulties for foreigners, and I mean, for me, it's even difficult. I was born in Beijing. I can imagine how difficult it is for a complete foreigner, right? Like like yourself. And I think the key is to find a partner you can trust. I think that's number one, and that it's the hardest. But my advice is to have a local partner who understands the Chinese way of doing things and understand how to deal with the government, etc. Because Chinese government, I think for a lot of cases, the process could be a little bit more convoluted than what people experience in the U.S. But other times it's a blessing because the China government are encouraging high-tech startups and actually giving away billions and billions of dollars to these startups. So having somebody who is able to navigate and take advantage of these supports is a must. And sometimes it takes a local to go through the tons of details. So for our company right now, a lot of times I would interface with these supporting events, but the actual paperwork, somebody will help me to finish. So that's important. I think a second thing important is starting a local company, unless it's totally foreign controlled, it would be a joint ownership. And joint ownership meaning sometimes could be tricky because the Chinese government sometimes would be, there's some fields that's sensitive that it's not allowed to have a joint venture, right? For example, some of the, for sure military space or technology associated with the military or some medical fields. So, well, actually ours is not because we're doing virtual reality right now, which is supported by the government. Sure. Yeah, so that's no problem. But some of those you have to be aware of having a joint venture.
Yeah, foreigners have it difficult starting in China because, as you mentioned, they need to have that joint ventureship. Yeah. So definitely trust is one of the main key components, right? Finding someone who you can trust to have that key aspect of your company, right? In your experience, how do you think that affects the foreigners, the entrepreneurs that you've seen in Zhongguancun, in Beijing, and how do you think that will develop moving forward, considering China's relationship with the U.S. and difficulties with the trade and tariffs and that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Let me just try to paraphrase you. What you're trying to ask is how foreigners, for example, those with a foreign passport or a U.S. passport, in my case, how do we work through these difficulties, and going forward, what do we think the future holds, right?
Yeah, like when you've spoken to the foreigners in Beijing who started their enterprises in China, like what kind of difficulties have they gone through as well, like on top of what you've described, and what other things do you imagine them going through, like moving forward?
I think, well, for one, it's a language, right? So for example, I have my Northwestern Alumni Association here and UW-Madison Association here, and a lot of entrepreneurs are of foreign origin, speaking very little Chinese. I think actually most of them are pretty optimistic because all of them seems to find a partner or somebody they can trust or subordinate that can help him navigate the space. So in the past, I find them very positive. At least the ones I see in Beijing and Shanghai, these are the ones I'm most familiar with. And they're able to actually leverage for being a foreigner, or in Chinese, 外国人 or 老外. A lot of times I think people wants to help them more, because I think more and more in China people are embracing a diversity, even in the startup, because naturally the government or individuals think the foreigners can bring new technology, new way of thinking. For example, I know Israelis entrepreneur, and he actually is doing really well in the educational space, and he's able to connect technology from back in Israel to actual practice what he's doing in China, in Zhongguancun. Yeah, so I think a lot of times is more positive than negative. But the second thing you said, it is very sensitive at this point about the trade war between U.S. and China. Even my family is divided back because my parents and sister in U.S. I remember my mom and my sister, they were pro Clinton, and my dad voted for Trump. So even the family's divided, and politics is a hard thing to discover. But I hope, most of people hope, this is mostly just talk, and because it's hard to really dissect in the intertwined profits and deficits between the two countries. Is so deeply intertwined. So hopefully this is just a political scuffling that happens all the time, right? So going forward, we don't want to see this happen, because I'm not in the trade industry, but actually my cousin he's in Quanzhou, which is near Fuzhou in Fujian, and that's a big exporting, I think #1 in China for shoes to the U.S. That's how U.S. get cheap shoes. And if this happens, I think he'll be the first one to protest. Yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering, because I would imagine that all entrepreneurs who are imagining a future where they expand outside the country of their origin would be perhaps worried or interested in seeing what the relationship between the countries are. The more open the relationship is between China and the U.S., for example, easier you would imagine it would be to do business as opposed to the other sense. So. Yeah,
definitely. We want to see everybody being one happy family, right? It's the two of the biggest economy, and in terms of I think pure purchasing power, I think China surpassed U.S. last year, so it's neck to neck. But in terms of economic cooperation, there's no #1, #2, right? It's one holistic worldview, and as entrepreneurs, we really think the relationships could be really in harmony going forward. Yeah.
You mentioned how one of the obstacles to foreigners starting business in China is the language, right? The language barrier. But considering how you've worked in Google, you said, right? And
Facebook and IBM, Microsoft, yeah.
IBM and Microsoft, Silicon Valley, they're all working on, or a lot of these companies are working on translation services, right? And how do you think that artificial intelligence will move in towards this direction, right? We already have some advances with Google, for example, providing better translations of Mandarin Chinese to English, right? And some companies are even trying to provide like instant kind of translations, so like devices you can stick in your ear, that kind of product and device, right? As an AI specialist, so what do you think about this obstacle moving forward, translations?
Oh, translation. Yeah, actually, talking about translation, in 2014, I helped to land the Cortana, which is Microsoft the AI agent at that time was only based on Nokia mobile devices. Yeah, and later it was ported into PCs, etc. Yeah, so translation at that time, I remember. So back to what I was saying, for our algorithm, PanguVR, we need real data. Yeah. Data is the key to learn and perfect your algorithm and be accurate. Same in pictures and rendering as in voice recognition. for Chinese, it's much harder than English because English you can have variants of accents, but in China, for example, in Fujian, incredibly, my company, I think 90% of people are from Fuzhou province, but there are more than 13 dialects, and they can't even understand each other. It's not like Southern versus New Yorker, they can't even understand each other. So in China, there's so many ethnic groups, people, and even the same ethnic groups, if you're like over a village or over a mountain from each other, it will be impossible for you to understand the other person. So I think going forward, I think it's getting enough sample to be able to help everyone or help the translation engine to be able to recognize voices or dialects better. But of course, you have the 80-20 rule, right? You want to cater to the masses versus there's like a trailing tail of different dialects. For example, Zulu language from South Africa. So thinking back in 2014, that was our key difficulties, getting enough data sample to make sure it works for the Chinese language. Because in the US, it was doing really well. The accuracy is over 99%, but in China at that time was not as accurate. Yeah, but now it's getting much. Of course, with more data coming in every day, it's getting much better. Yeah.
So the more data there is, the more likely that there is progress to be seen moving forward. Because I was hoping, I'm taking Mandarin classes right now, but I was hoping that there'd be an easy fix solution, that maybe if I wanted to start a business, rather than having to rely on someone else, maybe I could just pop in a device into my ear and just understand immediately because it's in English, translated real time, but I think maybe that's not going to be the case for another.
Oh, actually, they have that now.
Yeah, but from what I know, it doesn't work so well.
You haven't tried it. First of all, it's handheld, right? It's not in ear, and you would just let somebody speak into it, and then it'll translate.
Yeah, like kind of in real time.
Yeah. Right, and I remember, I think that has to be online as well. You have to have data over the internet.
Yeah, but there were reports that it doesn't work as perfectly. Obviously, it's just a new device, but I still think it'll probably need at least around a decade or so to be, because as you mentioned, there's so much data from all different kinds of dialects and stuff like that to gather and to analyze through that. It would take time for it to be something like instant.
Yeah, but it's definitely going to happen. Like even in our scenario, we have voice activations for the interaction you see in the VR. Yeah. We use face translators to translate voice into actual commands. So as they perfect, as these voice recognition companies perfect, we're going to see more and more devices that's very usable on the market. Yeah.
So what kind of difficulties did you have regarding China's housing boom? Do you see it as like more of an opportunity than something of a risk factor? What do you think about that for your own business?
Yeah, that's a very interesting phenomenon, particularly China. Actually, I think in 2017, according to Goldman Sachs research, there's 5 trillion spent on construction and housing, and the part we're interested in is actually the interior remodeling and furnishing, which accounts for 1.5 trillion of that, which is a huge market. So for us, that's one trend we really like because things are being built, and then when they build these houses, and in China, it's all freshly built, so people don't have the house. That's why they need virtual reality, because even before it's done, they can envision exactly what the house is like, walk through the house and see the real furnitures.
It's kind of like nesting, but virtual nesting.
Right, virtual nesting, right. And the second phenomenon I want to point out is in China, it used to be just be bare bone things that's offered to you. You had to put in like the flooring, the wall, the electricity, the water pipes, etc., the plumbing. And people want to do that because back then there's no standard and people don't trust the constructors doing that for you, because you order something that's say 100 RMB per meter, but they put in a pipe that's 50 RMB per meter, and you don't know it's behind the wall. Right. So that's why people want to do it. But now it's more standardized, so people actually prefer, and with the millennials being very busy, people prefer, okay, you do it for me. So that's why we have the next step. It's called 精装房. It's I don't know the translation in English, but it's half furnished. a half remodel, meaning all the wires, all the plumbing are put in place, the flooring is done. So this everybody's happy because customers are happy, and then the real estate developers are happy because whereas before they can sell maybe for like just a second tier city like 5,000 per square meter with a non-remodeled house, now they can sell maybe 800 RMB per square meter. And we're really happy because this is where we come in now. Because now you have the walls, the wires done, which things you can't see. Those you don't even need VR because you can't see behind the wall. You don't want to see them. So the next, what you want to see is your furniture put in.
Right.
And that's how actually our system can utilize. We can make them visualize what their furnitures, their bedding, their curtains, kitchen sink looks like. Yeah.
So I guess it's there could be a crossover with the business you mentioned before yours, right? Because let's say a customer or a client already has the specifications of the house that they want to buy, right? But it's bare bones.
Yeah.
So let's say, but they already know what they want to have, like let's say a computer here, a TV here, but rather than waiting for the house to be done and then furnishing it, they can just put on the headset, send the designs to you or your company, and you can kind of like use, based on the specifications, have it constructed, like the wiring even put in place before everything's finished already. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, actually, it's one step above that. So the plumbing and like the wires and the flooring is done mostly by real estate developers. So they have been doing that for the past few years. So they're pretty good with that. But what we're doing is actually called real walk-in and living, walk-in and staying and start to live, because actually all the furnitures will be done before you walk in. Meaning, so it's exactly what you said, but it's the not the wires or the flooring, but it's the furniture, like the sofa, because actually this principle came from Alibaba. Actually, it's called S2B2C, supply to business to consumer. Yeah, which means last year we took a lot of effort to, before people use VR, real estate developer, to sell houses. That's bottom line. You see this beautiful furnished home and you buy it, you sign the contract, you buy the house, but you had to put together furnitures later because, yeah, right, that's just to lure you into this, saying, wow, how beautiful it is. But now I think last year with this S2B2C method, we actually, for all of designs you see, all those SKUs are real furnitures we have contracted with manufacturers. So what you see is actually things we can ship before you walk in your house. So this is true walk in and start living concept. Yeah.
So I'd imagine, well, it's probably something that you're working on. Could be confidential or not, but I guess companies like IKEA would be very interested in this kind of service that you provide, right?
Yeah, IKEA and counterparts of IKEA in China. But IKEA, or there's a company called Hongxing Meikai in China, McKellen, I think, in English. So they're actually a big showroom. So they actually don't manufacture. They offload that to like manufacturers, and IKEA maybe more so because they have their own brand, but other big giants are just showrooms. So what we do to make sure the customer get the best pricing is we talk to the manufacturer directly. And then mostly they're based in Guangzhou, Dongguan, Shenzhen, etc. Yeah.
So they would send you like the images or the models of their specifications, or you create models from the inventory, and you have that loaded on your database, and you say, okay, if I'm a client, you tell me, okay, here we have all this kind of sofas, all this kind of cabinets, and you can choose whatever you like and you put whatever you want. Is that
correct? Yeah, exactly. You have to, right, exactly, your 2 point. You have to build 3 models, right? Either by taking pictures and rendering it into 3D or just building the 3D. So for each manufacturer we talk to, we have their whole inventory in 3D models. Then we give that to the designers, and the designer, based on your, for example, like you said, the blueprints and what they can afford, and the dimensions they will have. For example, 3 styles customer can choose from, and different price points at different price points.
Well, I imagine that after a while, like you mentioned, you have 300 terabytes.
We pass over 1,000 TB.
Over 1,000 terabytes of data, right? And I imagine that as you move forward, all this data will be very valuable because they're already models that are pre-made, basically, right? That other companies, other businesses will be starting from scratch, right? What other applications to see your business moving forward, like in terms of, I don't know, maybe gaming or medicine, something like that?
Okay, yeah. So I'll first describe our plan and vision for this. I think you touched a very good point, and then you can see where we're moving. I think it will be easy to see. So first of all, initially what we did is we render and transform objects automatically into VR. So through this, we have done a huge depository and created digital assets, right? Because in the information age, the most valuable is the digital assets. So this we then give back to the client for them to be able to sell better, to market. So first of all, we're sort of a conversion engine which helps you to market. But later we'll have a big repository and a platform for people to use and pick from. So no longer do you have to use as a render. You can just go and look into this repository and find what you need, either single objects in VR or entire scene of housing of, let's say, a park or entertainment ground, etc. So this is a big repository. And then the next stage where everything going together and with the possibility of future developments in VR, 5G, etc., we want to build a big portal, where an entry point where you can go into this VR world and pick out what you like or experience what you like. So that's kind of going to the future, but you can see this is a progress, and this in first and second stage will continue to cross multiple disciplinaries and sectors to perfect. For example, you said in games, for example, by converting millions and millions of physical space, game needs physical space as well. So this can be very well used for gaming. Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of. Have you ever played The Sims?
Oh yeah. Well, my sister played it. Actually, I've seen her play. I personally haven't played it, but I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't played it either because it looks a bit. It's not my type of game. Yeah, but I imagine that those are the kind of applications moving forward that companies such as Steam that are also developing their own virtual reality headsets would be interested in, right? So, curiously, regarding that, the Vive X, which is HTC Vive's global VR AR accelerator program, selected your company to join its ranks in November last year.
Correct.
So, can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So each year they would receive over 1,000 applicants of VR companies and computer vision companies throughout the world, and our company being focused on computer vision AI, we applied and was accepted among 20 out of the 1,000. So it's definitely handpicked by Vivex, and once we're in, they help us to do several things. First, introduced to us the newest technology. For example, when Focus and the Vive Pro came out, we're the first ones to borrow it and develop on top of it. And second, help us with BD, introduce us to companies that's global that would need our technology. For example, it introduced us to JLL, Jones Lasalle, the property management company back in US, and several others, which was very helpful. And third, it's head of the organization called VRVCA, VRVC Association, which has a pool of, I think, over 10 billion RMB, and this is used to invest in companies that it incubates. So all these are benefits we receive from HTC Vive.
So you mentioned that it's an R&B, so that's based here in China.
It's based in China and the Silicon Valley. So it's a consortium of VC companies that's interested in investing in VR and computer vision companies. Yeah.
So I see the future of VR being used in so many different applications, right? Like we mentioned before, gaming. I thought maybe it could also be used to train people as well, like especially in medicine, like surgeons moving forward. Yeah. So before they actually work on actual people, they can train themselves like through specific kind of applications. What other applications do you see virtual reality being applied to?
I think first and foremost, I think talking about more practical points, going forward, as I mentioned, the biggest use, I think for each headset that's sold, enterprise spent on that would be $3,744 versus a individual consumer spend, which is I think about $75. So definitely enterprise usage is there. And in terms of enterprise usage, I think for one, the foremost is productivity, right? Productivity is the key, and communication. I see this as a huge area which VR will be used for, because once you have these, people can talk and meet across borders, across time zones, right, across distance.
Yeah, I think that one of the projects that Facebook was planning to work on is kind of, like you said, like a platform where people can meet each other virtually.
Spaces, I think it was, right? Yeah, yeah. That's definitely Facebook and other companies that are developing this. I think also according to Granite research, I think that's the two areas. One is productivity. The second is training. You already mentioned using VR to train, for example, construction workers, miners, right, military personnel, so they can venture into dangerous fields without getting hurt, and learn from that. And then I think last, definitely, but not least, is education, right? It's tied to productivity, because now you can, without going, China has this education craze where every kid must go to Harvard, but with this VR, parents no longer have spent, millions of RMB, and they can just send their kids to virtual classrooms. Even the one you mentioned, right? It could be done with VR.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Before the podcast, we were talking about, I'm studying computer programming online through Harvard's CS50, which is Computer Science 50 class. So that's a class for its actual students, like an introduction to computer science. But they open it up for free to people online around the world. And what they started doing that's interesting regarding VR is that last year, I think, they started setting up cameras that were able to capture VR, right? So if you had the HTC Vive, like you mentioned, right, you could actually put it on as if you were sitting in the classroom there in the lectures, So yeah, definitely education, like maybe distance learning, that kind of thing, is going to be something that is going to be a valuable application of this resource, I think.
Right, correct. Yeah. So these are more practical things I can see that's dealing with education, dealing with practical areas VR could be. But of course, next you have the sky's the limit in terms of gaming, right? Having the next, I think the biggest is entertainment and social, right? Socializing is a basic need of mankind. We need to social. We want to meet people, for example, right? In US, there's coffee and bagels, where through Facebook, you can meet people every day. It'll be so much easier in VR, meeting people and enjoying yourself, playing a game, watching a movie. All these are what I think will be the next events.
Well, you watched the recent movie that came out, right? Ready Player One by Steven Spielberg.
Yes, I saw that last week.
Yeah, I saw it recently also. So that touches upon a lot of what we're talking here, right? Like the potential applications of this technology. Like what I was fascinated about watching the movie was how it changed society. We tend to imagine that new technologies, especially, well, in this case VR, will have a mostly positive impact on society and the economy as well. But the movie, I think, explored interesting concepts, that not all of it is going to be positive, of course. Like all technologies have the positive and negative applications, right? Like, for example, in the movie, you would have people who would be forced into working, using VR headsets, and they're kind of locked into it. They can't take it out, right? So, well, what did you think about the movie, like those kind of things, the positive and negative applications?
Wow, we have to go into the more debatable items. Yeah, I thought about that. So if you think about the positive application, I think one thing, it gives a peek into the future. People have said Ready Player One, it's second to none in terms of giving publicity or giving, putting VR on a pedestal, like what's going to happen in the future, right? This is the way of the future. I think that's what Steven Spielberg has done. It's a movie that really portrays that. In terms of the negative things, I think you're talking about the what IOI was the organization IOI. I think they call those slaves the Sixers because they have a 6-digit identification code. To me, that's a little bit stretching it because to me, VR now is still a game. If you think of the games, in the games they can power up, right? They have items they can collect over time. So if you play, I think even if you don't play, you must know 王者荣耀 by Tencent Games. 王者荣耀, the number one, the number one money making machine by Tencent Games. So in there you can collect power ups as well. But when you lose your count, or let's say you die, well, things for one stay there. It's not taken away. But second, even if you lose your count, you just go back to zero, right? Nobody's forced. You cannot go to a negative number. I think the concept in there is you can actually, it's like betting. You actually lose more than you have, which I think doesn't really. We probably will never go to that level. Making a game an actual real life instance where you can lose your pants and have to earn that back.
Well, let's go back to the first point. Yeah, like I think it was definitely like a big advertisement. The whole entire movie was like almost an advertisement for the industry, and you can even see people wearing the headset. It would clearly say like HTC.
Yeah, yes. That was one of the eggs in there. Yeah.
But of course, that's to be taken understood completely because that's what they want to do. They want to push for the technology. Yeah. But moving on to the second thing you said. Maybe you're right. Like in the movie, like you were explaining, they had this corporation that kind of exploited people's use of the technology. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch for now, but definitely there are other parts of the movies that did explore potential negative aspects. Like in the beginning of the movie, they had some sequences where people were so immersed in the simulation, right, that whenever they lost something or it was game over, they felt compelled to try to commit suicide, for example, right? That's another extreme application, right? But there are definitely ramifications, like in real life. Even now, there have already been reports, for example, in South Korea, of in South Korea there's a big culture of gaming, right, among millennials and younger generations, right? And that people is starting to take root into the culture, right? People are working almost as gamers, right? They earn money and salaries based on this profession, right?
The celebrities.
Yeah, some people become the top and they get a lot of money, right? But what you don't hear about is the hundreds or thousands of people at the middle or lower ranges who never get to that level, right? And there have been reports already of people who have died from gaming too much or spending too much time, hours or days even, just gaming, playing on the games. And since what I'm trying to get at here is that virtual reality, what it tries to do is tries to simulate reality to the next level, right? So games have been progressing from very early on, right, towards a kind of a goalpost where they are more and more akin to reality, right? Almost, you can even guess that there might be a future where it will be indistinguishable from reality, right? There's even a scene in the movie where one of the characters is tricked into believing that once he took off his headset, he was still in reality, but actually it wasn't. The simulation was so good, he couldn't differentiate from that, right? So I think there is a danger, a consequence of that, the realities that we experience spilling over into the real world, if you will.
So your point is you're really worried about this.
Yeah, well, I'm a bit of a pessimist in that sense, right? I don't want to think everything's going to be just milk and honey or sweet. There's definitely going to be some negative aspects to it, right? Fred, could you put up the article I showed you before? Right. So, for example, there's an article in the New Yorker that's titled "Are We Already Living in Virtual Reality?" and it came out in April 2nd, 2018.
So right after the movie was launched, a week after,
just around, yeah. So it was tapping into that theme, right? Okay. Can you show me the first slide, please, the first image? So in this article, they're talking about virtual reality and the potential effects it will have on society and the economy, right? And there's one quote that says here, embodied simulations seem to slip beneath the cognitive threshold, affecting the associative, unconscious parts of the mind. And in quotation marks it says, it's directly experiential. Slater said, it is not I know, it's I am. So what they were talking about here just before was they were simulating, they were giving participants a simulation of what it's like to be a child, for example, right? And what it's like to feel fear from the perspective of a child seeing something like an adult about to hit them, for example, right? And what the person interviewed in the article was saying that once they have the simulation, they feel as if they were that person being talked about, right? They have that experience almost as if it was theirs, right? So what I guess what can happen is that people will experience these virtual realities as real realities. You know, the question here is, we might consider it to be just merely a virtual thing, but is it really? I mean, we're experiencing things that are so real in the sense that it's still a reality in a sense. What do you think?
So experience virtual reality that could be becoming real, or
Yeah, so you could argue that virtual reality is still reality in a sense, right? Because there are still experiences that have an impact on you directly. You know, maybe depends on the level of how you're experiencing it. But yeah, the more we move into it, moving forward, the more risk there will be of negative consequences to society. What do you think?
yeah. Actually, it has been argued that virtual reality itself is a conundrum because you're really tricking your mind into believing you're in something, right, in another world, whereas you're actually grounded in this world. So that's kind of tying into what you're saying.
Yeah.
You actually, part of your mind knows you're wearing a headset, right? You're not in the Jurassic Park, you know, going by chased by dinosaurs. You're still sitting here with a headset on, but they're doing it so, or for example, HTC or other companies does so well that your eyes, well, we see things from our eyes, right? It's we have retinas and we have lenses to see the lights from, and so it covers it up so well that you almost believe you're in it. But a part of the mind is fighting it because you know you're not in the scene. You're still grounded, like for example, in this chair.
Yeah.
So that's kind of caters to what you're saying, and I think the person, to answer your question, is how much they want to trick their mind or your ability in tricking your mind. Some people could trick it more, some people maybe less, right? Depending what you want to believe, right? It's same as I think in everyday life when we go into a movie, some people are more into it, they start crying, and me just sitting here, you know, ha ha ha, I don't think that's so dramatic, you know, it's not touching to me. So it's different, right? People react differently, and that kind of answers your question. For some people, it may be so dramatic that you get horrified, you get scared, you get shocked. For other people, you know, I still know I'm grounded here, so whatever goes in there, it's okay, right?
Yeah. In the article, some of the people interviewed there, they propose creating what's called a VR code of ethics to avoid, like what you're saying, abuse of the technology, right? So it doesn't create situations where the people using the device are experiencing overtly negative consequences, right? Just before we go to the negative, another negative example, like one of the positive things that they mention here as well is they're saying here, Slater envisages salubrious, even beatific ways of learning through virtual embodiment. He says, imagine if you're afraid of public speaking. Now you can experience being embodied as Angelina Jolie and giving a speech in front of thousands of cheering people, he said. The confidence you feel while being embodied as Jolie, he thinks, would follow you back into your own body. Do you agree with that kind of statement? Do you think that through virtual reality, people can learn stuff like confidence, that experiences that wouldn't be, you couldn't teach like theoretically, right?
Yeah, if you it's perfectly, I think, portrayed in the movie Ready Player One, and you know, people are in this oasis, and I don't know if you actually have the chance to look up what the acronym stands for.
No, but what does it stand for?
If I remember correctly, OASIS stands for Ontological Anthropocentric Sensory sensory simulation. Yeah, interactive simulation. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it's yeah. So the second word, ontological, then anthropocentric. I think it means, you know, it's focused on me, focused on, you know, percentric, and I think that that's related to what you're saying. Like, you know, in the Oasis, if I'm the, you know, the Terminator that kills everybody and gets all their coins and all the equipments, when I take off my glasses, I'm gonna feel like I'm somebody, even though I'm in the slums of Ohio, right? So, I think that's very true. That's actually, that's, if you think about it, that's why, you know, Thyssen is making over 100 million RMB a day with 王者荣耀, because there's so many. Well, first of all, China has a huge population, and second, the game is free to play, and if you're just an average Joe, you know, every day, or you know, you can be a hero in that game and really taking your team on to win against other teams, and that people will send you gifts, people will send you gives you comments, befriend you, and I even heard you can ask, you know, if you're really good, girls will even ask you out for dates, which doesn't, you know, in real life that might not happen. So it's actually, you can see the pattern here. It's all these ideas and transferable either in the Oasis or in the game 王者荣耀 or in real life.
Yeah, you would just hope that, like in the movie, that the people asking you out are actually who they say they are.
The gender, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's not a man that's asking.
Yeah, not some, like I said, some fat man in some suburb. Yeah, so yeah, that's an interesting part that you mentioned as well, that that it offers that sense of escapism, right? That's what people are seeking oftentimes when they play these games, like even nowadays, right? When it wasn't games before, it was through books, right, or through other kinds of mediums.
Games, right?
Yeah, anything. So people wanted to escape reality to pursue something maybe they can control in a different way, right, or something that's different from what they can't control, which is reality in a sense, right? So, in a sense, like, yeah, of course there are some negative aspects, but it's not all negative. Like, there are some positive aspects as well. I personally think that, as mentioned in the article, one thing that can be highlighted is empathy, right? So, you know, like a saying says, put yourself in the shoes of another, right? Well, you know, it's kind of a silly saying, because you're not going to literally give me your shoes and I'm not going to put it on. That's not going to do anything, right? But through VR, you could theoretically do that in a sense, right? If you have an accurate model of, you know, what a person is, the life someone's living, and you simulate that accurately, you could almost imagine being that person, right? I think that could even be like a future market. You know, you could think about it later. You know, like imagine like if you have a contract with I don't know, Brad Pitt, for example, just to follow Angelina Jolie, right? If you could have a contract with Brad Pitt to say, okay, pay this much money and we'll give you a simulation of what it's like to live as Brad Pitt for a day, and I'm sure lots of people would clamor to get that kind of.
Yeah, definitely. That's what Oasis was about, right? You have all these super action heroes, I think, in there, all these nostalgic reference to the back, but those are actually people that's playing these heroes. You know, they want to be something bigger than real life.
Which was your favorite reference?
I was going to say HTC, but no, that was just I don't want to do ad for them here. I think my I really like the King Kong.
King Kong, yeah. I think it was great how they introduced him, and the whole thing, like, it was so action packed.
Yeah, I always have a soft heart for King Kong because I feel bad for him not getting a girl, and you know, so that has always been a pity when I watch his films. So you know, I like him. He's big, brave, and has lots of love. So that's, yeah, I really like that reference.
My favorite reference was the Gundam one.
Oh, the Gundam.
Towards the end, where one of the main characters, he starts like meditating, and then he comes I'm gonna come out as a Gundam. And
Oh, okay.
He fights the Mecha Godzilla.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, that one. Okay, okay. Yeah, that's cool.
Can you show me the next slide, please? Yeah. So we were talking before about some of the negative aspects, right? The article goes on to say that Jeremy Bailenson, a leading VR embodiment researcher at Stanford, reports that after performing a virtual vivisection, so cutting up bodies, he simply felt bad, responsible. I had used my hands to do violence. Pushing a punch or shoot button on a game controller and watching the results on screen, he writes, is an entirely different experience from playing an immersive, first-person VR game in which you use your virtual arms and hands to strike or stab an opponent, or to aim a gun at him and pull the trigger. In their VR Code of Ethics, Metzinger and Madere predict that the risk of users suffering psychological trauma will steadily increase as VR technology advances. Metzinger believes that virtual killing and sexual violence should be prohibited. He also worries about scenarios that encourage the character traits that psychologists refer to as the dark triad, which is narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. He fears the effects of a VR Western world, and he says that it's inevitable what's going to happen. Slater said over coffee, there's going to be a moral panic around VR as it spreads and spreads, just as there was with comics, with television, etc. It's going to be the root of every evil. And we're kind of seeing that happen already, right? Have you read the reports about how drone strikes are causing PTSD in the States, right? So you have these Navy soldiers, but their job is not to work abroad, right? They're working in the U.S. So they have a normal life. But they have a 9-to-5 job. Basically, is going to the military base, and they basically sit controlling, just as you would a game, basically, right? A drone, and this drone is thousands of miles away in Afghanistan or in the Middle Eastern country there, and through these controls, they start shooting or attacking objectives. Okay. And it's been happening for a couple of years now, and some of the people who do this job have come out saying they feel really there's a huge, such a big difference between what they're doing and what they go home back to, right? That they can't help but feel affected psychologically in some way, right? And some of them have also claimed to have developed PTSD because of that. Right?
Okay, PTSD, yeah, okay.
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Oh, yeah, post.
So I can't help to draw up some similarities to like this article says, to the VR being used that way, right? Like imagine like to a developing child, right? If you grow up in this environment where you're used to playing and killing everyone and earning points in this manner, it would be harder for you as a developing person to compartmentalize that or put a shift that from what you experience in real life, right? How do you see that?
Yeah. So, yeah, actually, it's a shock. I haven't heard about this PTSD in the Navy. So it's.
Did you look it up, Fred? Post-traumatic stress disorder in drone operators. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a shock, but it's not only in this that happened in this Steven Spielberg's movie. It also recently my experiences in the Blade Runner.
Blade Runner.
Yeah, the new one. Yeah. Right. In there, definitely the drones were hunting down, the characters in there. So and actually, as way back as you remember, Minority Report.
Oh yeah.
Right. Yeah, with Tom Cruise, right? That there was a drone that he had to replace the eyeball. It was searching. It was doing image recognition on the pupil to see if to track him down. Yeah, he took an eyeball of somebody else, I think, and like used it to get by the drone, right? He was that was a while back, but I really liked that movie. Yeah, that was pretty.
Yeah, even Ready Player One had that kind of use of drones to search for the characters.
Right. So to answer your question, anything could be used for violence or peace, right? A hammer could be used for, breaking a nut or cracking somebody's skull, as used by the mafia in the mafia movies. A gun could be used for holding peace or, using to kill people, right? And same as drones. Drones could be used for example, Jingdong.com is developing drones to do delivery, right? To unmanned delivery of parcels, right? To increase productivity. I think personally that's what drone should be for. If you think about a drone, it's basically a robot that flies. So it's there to overcome landscape issues, right? You can fly in the air, right? It's aerial. So I think to say that drone's bad, we can look into this article soon, but to say it's bad, I think that's up to debate.
Yeah, definitely.
And after we look at this article, I'll give you a little kind of inside detail on something we're doing with drones, even with PanguVR.
Okay. Yeah, but before this, I agree with you what you're saying. Like, all technologies, they basically have their good and bad uses. It depends on who is using it, with the motivation, the purpose they're using it for, right? I think the movie Ready Player One touched on this, right? It depends, like well, there'll definitely be people who try to abuse it or take advantage of any technology, right? But you always depend on people who will try to fight back on that or try to restore a kind of balance or equilibrium on the way technology is used in general, right? So hopefully, VR is also going to have that moment where, maybe it'll be pushed too far, but then people will form a consensus on how it should be used adequately, right? Like we're seeing happening in Facebook right now with the privacy concerns. People are realizing that the data was used inadequately, and now people are in outrage, and then hopefully the next step would be for there to be, more regulations or restrictions, that kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah, this article says it's by the New York Times. It's titled "Drone Pilots Are Found to Get Stress Disorders as Much as Those in Combat Do," and it was published on February 22nd, 2013. Scroll down a bit. Yeah, in the first study of its kind, researchers with the Defense Department have found that pilots of drone aircraft experience mental health problems like depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress at the same rate of pilots of manned aircraft who are deployed in Iraq or Afghanistan. Yeah, so the study affirms a growing body of research finding health hazards even for those piloting machines from bases far from actual combat zones. Though it might be thousands of miles from the battlefield, this work still involves tough stressors and has tough consequences for those crews, said Peter W. Singer, a scholar at the Brookings Institution who has written extensively about drones. He was not involved in the new research. Yeah, interesting.
Okay, yeah, so it's real. Yeah, it's very much real. And I guess you're saying this is related to VR because I have another example why it's related, but this because they're kind of putting the VR on, right, and just playing a game. Well, of course, the game is a real drone doing combat in Afghanistan, for example.
Yeah, well, they're not using VR in that instance, from what I know, but it's very similar, right there. They can do it in the future moving on. I think definitely there will be military applications for VR, which, as you mentioned, will be explored. For drone use in particular, right? If you could use drones with VR in tandem, who knows the effect that might have. But the link I wanted to bring with this to VR technology was that the psychological effect it has on people, right? So maybe these are soldiers and they know the real life consequences of what they're doing, which is why they get this effect, right? You don't, for example, see people playing games and killing game characters, which are obviously fictional. You don't see them getting PTSD, right? Maybe some cases
you get tired, right?
Yeah, you would get tired, right? Maybe some people do get a bit affected, but it's not like what we're seeing here happening.
Sickness, but that's it.
Yeah, but maybe the distinction is right now the games are obviously or they're obviously a fiction, right? But the closer we get to reality, which most virtual reality is aiming to get to, I believe, in my opinion, right? the closer it is to real life, that you can't distinguish what's happening on your screen to what is actual real life, then the more likely such effects that are discussed here could happen to anyone, especially people who are not trained to be soldiers, for example, right? Just the everyday person, the layman, right? Like in the movie, for example, you saw, obviously it's just a fictional example, but in the movie there was a businessman who had just died and lost everything, right? And he took off the headset and started running towards a window and almost jumped off, right?
Oh yeah, something like
So something like that is what I'm imagining.
Yeah, it's inevitable that the technology will advance. In this case, actually, it's a manned. Actually, this drone is not even automatic. It's manned by U.S. Navy, for example, personnel or the U.S. Army. But in the future, it's probably going to be unmanned. And actually, I want to show you another example how it's tied to VR. So actually, for all these drones, they can be equipped with cameras, right? Yeah. So this you can control. Well, even this they have camera because you're seeing and you're controlling them. But actually, they can have cameras, and this will be like unmanned vehicles where they can navigate just by a program and by intelligence, right? And the way it's trained, for example, you need to train these just like how you need to train through deep learning, with tons of data into how to avoid obstacles. And VR system right now is realistic enough that these lenses, the brains and the eyes of these drones can be trained inside of a VR scenario. And actually, we're working with Royal Holloway, University of London, to train with the computer vision lab and AI lab to train this. So we provide them with the VR world because we have hundreds and millions of these worlds, and we can implement their drone inside of our virtual world, and they can fly around and they can train 24 hours a day. So it takes like a year in real life, what we can achieve in like weeks because we have tons of data. So you can see another way of connecting because virtual reality is so real that we can allow drones to train their learning algorithms within our space.
Well, that's amazing. So these drones are specifically using your platform, just training to operate within indoor environments, interior environments, or what?
Yeah, it can go. Yeah, so for our environment, it's both interior and interior and exterior. Yeah, but mostly a lot of them is interior because interior has more obstacles than exterior. So this would require them to their algorithm to be perfected even at a faster pace, right? So right now we provide them with a lot of exterior, but in the future, exterior environment as well. Right? And so you can think of it. So a drone basically just like unmanned vehicle. You place an algorithm in them, and they have a lens. Some of them have sensors, some of them have couple lens, but it's basically a lens. And so there's data going to the lens. So what we do is we simulate the lens and their algorithm in our world and feed them with the visual data. So it's the same as in their training in real world, and that's how it gets done, right?
It'd be interesting if some AI companies that are focused on automated driving contacted you. Like, for example, it reminds me of the recent unfortunate accidents that occurred with was it Tesla? No, it was the Uber car, right? And Tesla also, they had some recent fatalities, right? But rather than, I mean, obviously it's important to have real life tests with these cars operating on the streets, but if they could perhaps use, in combination with that, they could also use platforms like yours to train their own AI how to deal with other obstacles in different environments. That could also be useful.
Right, that's what I was talking about to you about our third vision of in building a huge platform. People just can go in there and use for their own study, right? Unmanned vehicle company could go into this virtual world. We provide them the entrance, and they can use however they want to better train their algorithm. Yeah, so that's definitely something of the future.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk a bit more about the movie before finishing. So there was one interesting part about the end of the movie, not to give away spoilers, but
Okay, yeah, we have to be
um,
careful.
in case someone watching
Yeah.
it wants to watch it still. But there, one of the themes talked about, touched on, was uploading of consciousness, right? And like we were discussing earlier, VR is getting. We'll get to a point in the future where it's almost indistinguishable from reality, and then merged with artificial intelligence. What do you think about the theme explored in the movie where someone had uploaded their consciousness, so where it was ambiguous to whether that person was alive or not in the system, right?
This is something that bothered me a little bit too. So I think the first time I experienced this was reading Harry Potter novel. If you remember Dumbledore of Hogwarts, right? He has this thing called the pensive. And he put like shreds of memory in there. Yeah, he put that in there, and Harry would go in there and see. And I think you can separate them into two things. So in the Dumbledore example, he's basically putting a story there. There's no interaction, right? You go there, you see the story of, oh, here's what happened to my mom and dad, and I talked to Professor Snape's, blah, blah, blah. But in Ready Player One, it's more interactive memory. Although it doesn't mean it's actually interacting with um, uh, with uh, with you in the movie. Wade, I was trying to come on that. Yeah, Wade. So I was trying to interact with Wade. Yeah, that's his name. We're not sure if it's actually Holloway was interacting with him, right? Because it could be just a computer program. Like if you take the key and you sign the paper, then this happens. But if you don't sign it, I'll give you this. Yeah. So it could be just a program that's in there. And but then there's the Holy Grail, which you probably, being a sci-fi fan, you probably watch Black Mirror. Yeah.
I'm watching some episodes now.
Okay. Okay. So there was this episode that, by you saying this, reminded me. This one called San Junipero. Yeah. There's an episode called San Junipero, which is the space when people die, they can choose to upload their conscience in there. So this is a wholly different, the new different thing, right? So this actually, your conscience will get to live on. So it's actually going to consciously make decisions, which, it's a level up. Yeah. So I think it's very possible in VR, but of course, the Black Mirror is just a sci-fi, right? Sci-fi kind of a sitcom. But I think in VR, it's very possible to upload stories or even program stories where it's like a game, right? You open this door, here's what happens. But I think this is definitely philosophical. Even in the San Junipero, I think you're uploading a clone version of your conscious, because your own conscious is attached to your body. When you die, it dies, right? And now we're getting like more philosophical yeah.
It'd be interesting to see, like, there will definitely, given the opportunity, there will definitely be people who will choose maybe to have a clone, let's say, of their consciousness while they're living anyways, right? And then to have that kind of feedback, of someone who is not you, but in some sense is you, but just digital version of you, right?
You mean having like a visor on both of your shoulders, having a conscious?
Well, kind of like that, but just basically like you would upload a copy of who you are to a server, right? And it would be living based on AI. And then maybe this AI can learn more about you and then advise you in that sense, right? It could be your own personal, really personal advisor in that sense, right?
Yeah, uploading. That's what the San Junipero is about. Uploading it into a server. So it's like a huge server out there. You upload your conscious.
Do the characters actually die before doing that, or?
Yeah, they upload it and they die. You can choose to upload it and you die.
But I mean, you're alive and you still upload it, so you have two versions of yourself.
Yeah, I think actually it was described to me by a friend, so I just know the synopsis. But what he said is, before you die, people would choose to upload it. It's like donating an organ kind of thing. Like you do it or you don't. But like you said, it's in the server out there. Yeah. And those conscious get to interact with each other, but not in the physical form. It's like we can still talk to each other in this kind of way, but we can't touch each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there will definitely be people who choose to live a life in virtual reality, almost permanently as much as they can, right? Because maybe by uploading their consciousness or just staying in that virtual reality world, right? It's kind of something that's already happening in or has been explored in media already. Like in Japan, for example, you have certain people who are members of society who refuse to interact with society, right? So they just stay in their rooms, right?
Hermit or meditation.
No, well, kind of, but in Japan they call hikikomori.
Okay.
So they just reject being part of society. They just they live off welfare maybe, or and they just stay in their rooms or their homes and they barely leave, right? And they just play games or whatever. That.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, to look that
Can,
up.
can you look up hikikomori? It's HIKKIMO. Yeah, that one. Yeah, yeah, hikikomori. In
Okay.
Japan, hikikomori are reclusive adolescents or adults who withdraw from social life, often seeking extreme degrees of isolation and confinement. Wait, what was that? Yeah, hikikomori refers to both the phenomenon in general, and recluses themselves. Hikikomori have been described as loners or modern-day hermits, like you were saying, right? Estimates reveal that nearly 500,000 Japanese youths have become social recluses, right? So that's why we're already seeing this kind of niche happening around the world, right? In Japan, at least. So with introduction of virtual reality systems, it could become more pronounced. But that's just, and once you consider being able to maybe even upload your consciousness.
So these people will definitely be embracing like Oasis or VR virtual world.
Definitely.
Yeah, like on top of what you're saying, I think the only two functions we need that VR can do is one, we need to eat, right? I mean, even you can order in VR and have it delivered to your door, so you need to take a moment to eat, and then maybe reproduction, right? That's the only two things I think what VR eventually cannot do, right?
Or maybe the first one can be solved by having like intravenous.
It's basically in like a plant, right? You have all these things feed to you, and you're in this VR. Okay, how about second one?
Well, who knows? The science fiction fan of me thinks maybe there will be people who are designed or are tasked to take care of that. Or if we move further on technologically, maybe the machines are just taking care of that for us.
Yeah, we don't need to reproduce. Like we're married in the VR world, right? We have our wives and.
Well, that could be one scenario. Another one could be maybe even to physically reproduce. Maybe machines just take samples of our DNA and then use that to
Just sperm and egg and have test tube babies.
Yeah, test tube babies, maybe cloning, or maybe not even just up to whatever happens in the future. But that kind of thing, I don't think it would be so far off. It reminds me of have you read the book before, Brave New World?
Yeah.
About Aldous Huxley. So they have the reproduction is basically, well, they have it only for entertainment purposes, right? But the actual process of reproducing to further the population is taken care of by the government, the system, right? Okay. So you have different classes of people.
Yeah, I read that in college. I kind of forgot, but like he ventured into like a poor place to have real life or something.
Yeah. He escaped from that society and he went to an Indian colony, I think.
Colony. It's like a village to escape, and then he met his real love or something like that.
I watched it too, but something like that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And Matrix is like that too, right? It's you have all these things.
Everything is controlled.
Yeah, control.
So that's definitely the dystopian version of what could happen, but yeah. And considering the future potential of VR, like one thing that I'm interested in personally is Elon Musk's project, which he started in 2016, I believe, called Neuralink.
Okay.
Could you look up, please, Fred? Neuralink is NEURA link. Yeah, Neuralink. Yeah, and Wikipedia there. Yeah. So this is basically Elon Musk's project, which says Neuralink is an American neurotechnology company founded by Elon Musk and 8 others report to be developing implantable brain-computer interfaces. The company's headquarters are in San Francisco, started in 2016, blah, blah, blah. And Wait But Why reported in April 2017 that Musk said the company aims to make devices to treat serious brain diseases in the short term, with the eventual goal of human enhancement. In June 2016, Musk discussed a science fiction concept called neural lace, which is part of a fictional universe in The Culture, a series of novels by Ian Banks. So this is maybe just a stretch, but I believe that technology and devices like virtual reality headsets and this kind of stuff, what they're doing is they're following a trend where technology has become more and more, not just portable, but it will continue to become embedded, right, in our lifestyle, right? So even just now, if you go anywhere you go, you will, especially in the subway, you will see people like glued to their devices, right? Almost like they're cradling a baby, almost, right? Yeah. And it's trying to find ways to become closer to us, right? And you have people now it's on your wrist, like a watch, right? And then later it's going to be in your ear, and then later it's going to be maybe in your eyes, and like Neuralink, maybe it's going to be in your brain eventually, right? Virtual reality is another step in that process, I believe. You know, just my opinion. But right now, obviously, the devices are very bulky, you know, and they have their own problems. Like I think some people get motion sickness from virtual reality. Yeah. That's something that people are trying to fix, right?
Yeah, they have to do the refresh rate.
Yeah, and so they'll definitely. It's not going to stay that way, of course. Maybe in the next couple of years or decades, they'll find a way to make it almost embedded or something that is as unobtrusive as possible, right? So this is why I think maybe Neuralink is interesting, because why bother having hardware where you can just have, you know, some assimilation directly in your brain, right? So what this project is trying to do is not just like virtual reality. What they want to do is have your brain interface with a computer, which can then interface with other brains, right? So I can communicate with you not by talking, but just by thinking about it. And ideally, this is interesting because, you know, words are flawed, right? And it depends on the individual to express themselves in a way that you understand, right? But if I could express my thoughts and ideas, maybe that would be clear, right? Maybe you would understand perfectly, and it would be faster.
Yeah, because we could be linked, right? Through like 5G, right? Because we actually have a chip now. Yeah.
And considering your father is a neuroscientist, what do you think about?
Yeah, it's interesting because my dad actually studied neuroscience all his life, and the Neuralink, the Elon Musk's company, I think one thing he need to achieve initially, actually I talked to this with my dad, is actually only a fraction of how our brain and our cells work has been discovered by science. For example, my dad spent lifelong trying to discover how the light we see focused through our lens onto retina is transferred through sensories and cells and neurons into our brain, so we recognize all the images we see. Or for example, where are the memories kept, right? How come some people have good long-term memory, some people have good short-term memory, some have neither. So all these are yet to be answered, and to have a device that's intrusive, first we have to answer these questions. That's how I was joking to my dad. I said, Dad, even though you're retired now, you should file application with Elon Musk and help him conduct the basic research. So, you know, now you ask this question, I was just thinking, so first of all, I see a similarity that, you're saying, yeah, why have bulky devices when you can have something that's implemented? Actually, when you said that, it makes me think of cosmetic surgery, believe it or not. Yeah, cosmetic surgery. Like, right, some people wear glasses, right, because it makes them look like a scholarly. Some people, we wear makeups, right? Girls wear makeups to make skin well. But why not just make it all better, right? If you have in China, double eyelids is considered beautiful, right? Beautiful. Cut your eyelids, you know, make your skin, you know, do a shot of Botox and make your nose higher and do your lips, etc., your cheeks. But these come at a cost, right? It sometimes fails, sometimes it's painful, and this is only like on the surface. Imagine have something that actually meddles with how your cells work and how your thoughts work. I think that's tons more complicated than just, you know, making your nose higher, right, or double eyelids. So to me, for example, that's a dangerous thing if we don't understand on the very rudimentary or foundational level how cells interact, what neurons handles what. All these are to be answered because I remember seeing my dad even when I was little. My mom was in a different city, so he would carry me to the laboratory, and I would stay him like past midnight, and he's often there until 3, 4 a.m. or all night. All he's doing is trying to capture one cell. I don't know. That's the term he used. I don't know what it really means, but he's there. If you just find one cell that responds to a signal, he's happy, right? He's done for the night. That's his reward. So, all these are at a very basic biological level, and I think still a lot of research needs to be done before we can do something invasive. Yeah.
The brain is such a mystery to scientists, even to this day. It's hard to imagine. Like we don't even know what our current stimuli does to us and how we interact with it ourselves, right? There's so much to discover still, and we're still finding out every day, trying to figure out more about it, about our brains. That you're right, I agree. If we start tinkering with it and adding things to it and trying to, mess around there, who knows what the consequences will be. But I think it's very similar to the theme we were discussing about earlier with VR in the movie, that any new technology will have its negative and positive consequences or uses. Depends on people discovering what those limits are, right, and finding ways to maybe avoid those in the next iteration, or to avoid or mitigate risk, mitigate negative consequences, and to move toward a better direction, right? Once something negative does happen.
Right. Everything you have to think twice about the consequences, right? In his example, he's trying to treat Alzheimer's disease or disease such as this. It's same as testing drugs for like late stage cancer patients, right? These people, we want them to recover. You want to try something new, then let's see if we can help them, right? It's kind of on that path.
Yeah, and I think VR could also be used in that similarly, right, to help diseases and that kind of.
Right. It has. It has done very well with children with like Down syndrome. For example, it can simulate, they can kind of play in the different environment and simulate their brains. I think I've read studies about that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how VR can be used in the development of young children, right, like educationally, right, rather than sitting in front of the TV, right, to maybe simulate a learning experience through VR, but although I think it's cool, from a science fiction perspective, I think sometimes we're treading into realms like the Neuralink discussion that are slightly worrying, in how much we're trying to manipulate, in a sense, human capabilities, right? Because these are things that obviously are not natural, right? We're not designed to experience simulated environments, right? We're just designed to experience the world as it is, right?
But there's a need for that, for sure, right? I think that's why movies exist, why books exist, because we want to escape, like you say, escapism. But it could be good, because we don't, like, I could, for example, I could cram 12 hours a day, for example, but I always need breaks in between to make sure I can refresh myself. I think that's what vacation does, right? You say vacation to escape your work, right? That's what it does. It's different levels. So VR, I think it's just a tool to escape, and that's okay, because I think we all need to escape one moment or other.
Yeah, we're designed to use tools most of all. So I think it's inevitable that we progress and we perfect these tools until maybe one day we become the tools themselves.
I'm actually interested in coming back, like say in 3 years, 2-3 years, to have a similar conversation, right? To see how much the technology has advanced, because by that time I think we'll have a whole new plethora of new devices that's less lighter and more interactive,
more effective.
More effective.
And maybe I think the big issue right now is not very commercially viable for the everyday person, right? It's like so expensive, like you were saying, what, $3,700 around that?
Yeah, even the new Pro is around a little bit under 10,000 RMB.
So to bring it down to maybe, I don't know, even just 500 or just 1,000, that would be.
actually Samsung research said by 2020 the penetration rate for VR, they predict that it's going to be a tipping point where 2020 the penetration is going to reach about 8% of the population that's within the millennial range, and they think that's a tipping point, just as when PCs, mobile devices were tipping points. That's the penetration needs to reach.
Well, I would definitely buy one. I'm not going to buy it right now because it's expensive. But if I were to buy it, I would buy it for games. That's definitely what I want to do. So
you can try it. You can try it. You can try it at next time. Come to HTC, our incubator, and you can try the games first before you buy.
Great. I'll try it.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to wrap it up? It's about like an hour, almost 2 hours right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
This long, so it's
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add? Anything before we finish?
Yeah, no, I was going to add a little bit because actually for kids with Down syndrome and low IQs, we were thinking about doing something of that with this a government agency, nonprofit agency, and an education firm called Joyview. But that was it was already past that question that we're talking about. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, we can. We'll definitely keep in contact, and whenever you have any news, feel free to come in next time, and happy to have you on.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.